Are we seriously here again?
Yes.
And this time, the documentation is worse. What happened at Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Saturday night was not simply a competitive loss or a bad shooting night absorbed by a team that otherwise maintained its structural integrity. It was a systematic, multi-layered organizational failure that resulted in a 16-point blowout against a franchise that had never played a WNBA regular season game before May 2026. Every component of that failure, the offensive collapse, the interior defensive breakdowns, the rotation management issues, and the injury transparency questions that have surrounded this team for weeks, was visible on the floor, measurable in the box score, and traceable to decisions made by the coaching staff before, during, and after the game's most critical moments. The final score was Portland Fire 100, Indiana Fever 84. The Fever now sit at 4-4, and the structural questions raised by this result are not the kind that simply resolve themselves over time or build a complete analytical record. The conversation must begin where every accountability discussion surrounding this team starts. Caitlin Clark. Clark played just 21 minutes and 44 seconds, scoring 6 points on 1 of 7 shooting from the field, a 14.3% mark. She missed both of her 3-point attempts, finished with a -8+ rating, and fouled out of the game. Viewed in isolation, those numbers are concerning. Viewed within the context of the previous 2 weeks, they become even more significant. Across her last 2 games combined, Clark has shot just 4 of 19 from the field, or 21%. Her 3-point shooting, which stood at 44% during a 4-game stretch only 2 weeks earlier, has fallen to 0 across 2 consecutive outings. This is no longer a single-game statistical anomaly. It is a documented 2-game trend with a clear downward trajectory. That decline is occurring alongside a physical situation that the coaching staff has not fully explained with the level of transparency that recent events arguably require. Clark herself has described her back as something that gets out of line pretty quickly. That statement reflects a recurring physical issue rather than a fully resolved acute injury. The game-time scratch that preceded the first Portland matchup, the same situation that resulted in a formal WNBA warning regarding injury reporting compliance, was officially attributed to back stiffness. Since then, the reductions in Clark's minutes during consecutive losses have been clearly documented. The possibility that head coach Stephanie White is managing Clark's workload due to ongoing physical concerns that have not been publicly communicated is not an unreasonable theory. Given the established reporting pattern and the available sequence of events, it is a logical analytical inference. What remains far more difficult to defend, however, is the specific rotation decision that ultimately defined the game's most important early turning point.
In a trade. Caitlin Clark was benched in the first quarter of this game. And after that, she started getting in foul trouble, and she was benched throughout the majority of this game. I don't have the energy to even make a video right now. So I'm just so mad, guys. Final score 84-100. I am so fucking mad right now.
Stephanie White removed Caitlin Clark from the game in the first quarter, a decision that carries significant analytical implications. Pulling a player who is already struggling with her shot and working through the mechanical and rhythmic disruptions that often accompany a shooting slump risks interrupting the very process needed for recovery. During the opening stages of a game, when its competitive tone and flow are being established, continuity matters. A player attempting to regain form benefits from a steady sequence of possessions, reads, catch opportunities, and defensive engagements that help rebuild confidence and restore shooting rhythm. By removing Clark from that environment and placing her on the bench during a critical developmental stretch of the game, the Fever disrupted that continuity. When Clark returned to the floor, she was forced back into live competition against a defense that had already gained additional time to refine and adjust its coverage schemes. Rather than helping facilitate a return to offensive rhythm, the sequence arguably made that process more difficult. The night ultimately ended with Clark fouling out after committing 5 personal fouls, removing her entirely from the game's decisive stretch. As a result, the player who serves as the foundation of Indiana's offensive identity, the player whose presence creates spacing, generates defensive pressure, and simplifies opportunities for her teammates, was unavailable in the closing minutes of a contest the Fever lost by 16 points. In a game where offensive creation was desperately needed, Indiana finished the fourth quarter without its primary engine on the floor.
Saying different things about Caitlin Clark. How can you be in rhythm when the referees call every foul for you just touching a damn basketball? The lineups has been just so horrendous. And I never thought I'd be saying this, but I wish we had Christy sides, bro. At this point, it is brutal to watch. The Indiana Fever is currently in the final seconds of this basketball game. It is so bad tonight that Stephanie White is actually trending on. She's trending on.
The fan response to Saturday's result represents a form of organizational intelligence that successful franchises ignore at their own risk. Front offices with genuine institutional self-awareness understand that fan sentiment, particularly when it reaches a consistent and measurable level, often reflects deeper concerns about the direction of a team. In Indiana's case, the reaction has become especially noteworthy. This is the same fan base that endured years of rebuilding, demonstrated remarkable patience through multiple disappointing seasons, and has invested heavily in the franchise's growth, a commitment reflected in the extensive attention surrounding ticket demand and attendance records. Yet many of those same supporters are now expressing nostalgia for a coaching staff they once openly criticized and demanded be replaced. That shift is significant. When a fan base begins viewing a previous regime as preferable to the current one, the issue extends beyond isolated losses or temporary frustration. It signals a credibility problem that has crossed an important threshold. At that point, confidence in leadership can no longer be restored through press conferences, explanations, or messaging campaigns. It can only be rebuilt through tangible improvement and consistent results on the court. Unfortunately for Indiana, Saturday's performance moved the conversation in the opposite direction. Rather than providing evidence of progress, the loss intensified existing concerns and raised new questions about the team's direction. Among those concerns, none was more glaring than the Fever's defensive struggles in the paint, a problem that warrants its own detailed examination.
The Portland Fire has made 52 points in the paint. 52 points in the paint. They're literally picking the Indiana Fever apart. They have no bigs. The entire front office needs to be fired today. Amber Cox.
The defensive breakdown was perhaps most clearly reflected in Portland's dominance inside the paint. The Fire scored 52 points in the lane against an Indiana Fever roster whose defensive identity is built around Aliyah Boston serving as the team's primary rim protector and interior anchor. Boston finished the game with a -14 rating, the lowest mark among all Fever players. While that statistic will naturally draw attention to her individual performance, the larger context points toward a broader structural issue. The defensive scheme placed Boston in positions where she was repeatedly forced to respond to the specific offensive actions Portland was executing, and the responsibility for designing and adjusting those schemes rests with the coaching staff. Players operate within the framework established by their coaches. They execute coverages, rotations, and assignments that are determined on the sidelines. When an opposing team scores 52 points in the paint against your starting center and you lose the game by 16 points, the result cannot be viewed solely as an individual player failure. It reflects a systemic defensive breakdown. The inability to limit interior penetration, disrupt offensive actions, or make effective in-game adjustments suggests a problem that extends beyond execution and into the design of the defensive approach itself. In that sense, Portland's paint dominance was not simply a statistical footnote from a difficult night. It was evidence of a larger defensive failure with roots in the coaching strategy that governed the game.
Lexi Hall was horrendous tonight. And I hate to say that for Lexi, man. Lexi was all 4 front of field, all 4 from 3. And once again, the Indiana Fever has no-name players getting... Who the fuck is Megan Gustafsson? She had 22 points. She couldn't miss. Megan couldn't miss. 88 from the field. 1-on-1. She shot 100%, bro. She missed 1 free throw. Megan did. I don't even know who Megan is.
Megan Gustafsson finished the game with 22 points while shooting an extraordinary 88% from the field. Gustafsson is a proven and productive professional player, but performances of that efficiency rarely occur against a well-structured and properly functioning defense. The defensive breakdowns that enabled those numbers were evident throughout the game. Indiana repeatedly failed to identify and disrupt Gustafsson's preferred catch points, struggled to contest her most comfortable finishing angles, and did not make the necessary in-game adjustments after her early success became apparent. When a player is shooting at an 88% rate, particularly over the course of an entire game, the situation demands immediate tactical responses designed to increase the degree of difficulty on every possession. Instead, those adjustments never fully materialized. The result was an offensive performance that grew more efficient as the game progressed rather than becoming more difficult. From an analytical standpoint, the explanation is not that Gustafsson suddenly transformed into an unstoppable offensive force for one night. Rather, it is that the defensive structure failed to apply the level of pressure and resistance that professional competition is expected to provide. No disrespect is intended toward Gustafsson's career accomplishments, but when a productive yet non-superstar player approaches near-perfect efficiency against a defense, the focus inevitably shifts from the scorer to the system attempting to defend her. In this case, the evidence points toward a defensive scheme that consistently failed to challenge her strengths, allowing Portland to capitalize on opportunities that should have been significantly more difficult to convert.
And Steph White are both trending. Fever fans want her to be left behind in Portland. Stephanie White coaching is criminal. Let's just pull up the latest, bro. Let's just pull up the latest. Fire Stephanie White and Amber Cox. This next week. The experiment is over. It's definitely over. Cannot believe what the front office plus Stephanie White plus her atrocious coaching staff has done to once-in-a-lifetime player in Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell, Aliyah Boston. Plus, this is...
The current record and overall trajectory of the Indiana Fever require honest evaluation without any attempt to soften the underlying concerns. Indiana sits at 4-4 and has lost 4 of its last 5 games after opening the season with a promising 3-1 record. At the same time, Caitlin Clark's shooting struggles have extended across multiple games, with her field goal percentage dropping to 21% during that stretch. Defensively, the team has allowed significant interior success, including a 52-point performance in the paint by a first-year expansion franchise. Questions have also emerged regarding rotation management, particularly during Saturday's loss, when the team's primary offensive creator was removed during a critical rhythm-building phase of the game and was ultimately unable to influence the contest's decisive moments. More importantly, many of the structural concerns that were evident early in the season remain unresolved. The lack of consistent secondary playmaking, the limited utilization of pick-and-roll actions, and the apparent tension between Clark's natural offensive strengths and the system head coach Stephanie White is attempting to implement continue to surface in game after game. Rather than showing signs of improvement, those issues have become increasingly difficult to ignore. They are now accompanied by ongoing questions surrounding Clark's physical condition, particularly her back, and the extent to which it may be affecting her performance. If that issue is influencing her shooting mechanics, release timing, or ability to generate power from her lower body, key components of her deep-range shooting ability, then it represents a matter of substantial competitive importance. The concern is heightened by the sequence of events already documented this season. The organization previously received scrutiny regarding injury reporting procedures, and Clark herself has publicly acknowledged that her back issue can be recurring in nature. When those factors are combined with reduced playing time in recent losses and a noticeable decline in shooting efficiency, the result is an analytical picture that naturally raises questions. In situations like this, direct and transparent communication from the coaching and medical staff can help clarify the circumstances and reduce speculation. Absent that clarity, uncertainty tends to fill the gap. It is also worth acknowledging a conversation that has begun to emerge among segments of the fanbase: trade speculation involving Clark. That discussion does not necessarily represent a realistic or appropriate immediate solution, but its appearance this early in the season is notable. Generational talents typically do not become the subject of trade conversations among their own supporters just 8 games into a season unless there is broader frustration with the organization's direction. The existence of those conversations says less about Clark herself and more about the level of trust fans currently have in the franchise's ability to maximize the talent around her. Ultimately, the most important question facing the Fever is no longer whether problems exist. The evidence suggests that they do. The question is whether the organization can correct course before those issues become more deeply embedded. Is the current situation simply a temporary performance slump within a system capable of adjusting and improving, or do the 4-4 record, the defensive breakdowns, and Clark's recent shooting struggles point toward larger structural challenges that cannot be solved through routine lineup and rotation changes alone? As the season progresses, that distinction will become increasingly important, and the margin for error will continue to shrink with every result.